Well, trade tensions between the US and China are on the agenda of the IMF and World Bank annual meeting in Bali. The IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, has warned against a trade war.
Even though trade cooperation has driven an unprecedented period of growth and prosperity over the last 70+ years, today it faces a backlash, partly because too many people have been left out. We estimate that escalation of current trade tensions could reduce global GDP by almost 1% over the next 2 years. Clearly, we need to de-escalate these disputes. But just as clearly, we need to reform the global trade system to make it even better, fairer, stronger, mutually beneficial to all nations and all people, and fit for the future. But that means fixing the system together, not tearing it apart.
Al Jazeera's Scott Heidler joins us live now from Bali. Scott, so global financial leaders will clearly have lots to talk about, but what will they be focusing on?
Darren, well, absolutely. It's a lot about trade tensions, as we heard there from the head of the IMF, because it's such a wide shadow that is cast by this trade tension, because when you have the two top economies in the world engaged in trade tensions, that has knock-on effect. And to talk about this further, let's bring in Curtis Chin. Now, he is a former U.S. ambassador to the Asian Development Bank. So obviously these trade tensions have a knock-on effect, yes, in the region because of the two nations involved, but also even beyond that because of just how pervasive and how deep these economies go around the world, right?
Absolutely. You know, if you think about some of the big stories, the big trends we're hearing about here at the World Bank IMF meetings, clearly the big one is a still growing but perhaps slowing growth rate for the global economy, and one of the factors is very much the growing tensions between the United States and China. As you noted, the two largest economies in the world, trade drives growth. But at the same time, despite the worries, a little bit of skepticism of what's going on in that relationship, I'm an optimist, and I feel if this leads to a more balanced, sustainable relationship between the two largest economies in the world, that's a good thing for global growth.
Will there be a bit of growing pains before that actually happens? Because, yeah, exactly, as you're saying, this is kind of, it could be a process that's better for nations globally for the economy in the long run. But there could be some growing pains initially, though, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's a fast pace, slow pace, no pace of growth, there's always, unfortunately, going to be losers as well as winners. And so the challenge when we think about what the World Bank, what the IMF, my old position at the Asian Development Bank, what these institutions are doing, they're driving growth, but I hope they can also focus on addressing the issue of inequality. Not all people will benefit at the same time. So in the long run, again, as we think about the adjusting world that we live in, what President Trump has clearly done is disrupted what had been the story of these last 2 decades, I'd say, which has been the steady growth of China. Clearly, China, to its great credit, has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But as China has grown up, it too has to grow up in its relationships and interaction with the rest of the world.
And one idea that's been floated and then kind of discussed here is that the you have these emerging economies, some that are extreme poverty around the world, and because of what's going on with the trade tensions, it could affect them disproportionately. Say that there's a third removed country from the United States or from China, but because of these trade wars, their trajectory to get out of extreme poverty is stymied because of what's going on. So there is kind of a knock-on effect, yes?
Clearly, actually, I'm now with a group called the Milken Institute. One of the themes we're really focused on this year is this world in transition. And as you note, the trade tensions, trade wars, clearly going to impact markets around the world, including emerging markets. But at the same time, I would note that there may well be benefits. Let me give you an example. As we think about U.S., China, the tariffs, things become more expensive, what may well happen in the long term will be for the good, which is a more balanced supply chain for the manufacturing companies of this region of the world. That not everything will be placed in one country, say China. But that trend also has already been in process. As China, as it's gotten richer, its labor costs have gone up also. And so we may well see the speeding on of this process where other countries will actually also benefit as a trade relationship between the United States and China adjusts. That's a good thing.
And some, absolutely, and some of those nations that could benefit from this are right here, right in Southeast Asia, because because of their proximity to China and the shifting supply chain, they could benefit from this, the increase of labor in China, but also the trade tension with the United States, right?
Yeah, I'm struck by something Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, said yesterday. She was asked as she thought about the world ahead of us. Was she really worried? Was she optimistic? Was she concerned? And she came back and said that she was desperately optimistic. I'd rather say that I'm perhaps relentlessly optimistic, but pragmatically optimistic. And I think businesses in this region, businesses all around the world, will be very pragmatic and think through what will be the long-term implications of these growing tensions between the U.S. and China. Clearly, I'm no fan of trade wars, but my hope is that out of this will become, again, a more sustainable relationship between China and the U.S., and that will be a good thing.
Christian, thank you very much for your time. So, Darren, obviously there's some growing pains that the global economy will face, yes, because of what's going on and the tension between the United States and China, but also just the evolving economy and the different economies that might have a different place once this trade tension is finally subsided and we can move forward. Darren.
Scott, thank you.